Victor and the Forbidden Watch. The night of the banquet finally arrived, and Victor showed up early at the garden where the whole thing was set to happen. It was a grand old hotel tucked inside a lush garden, right in the heart of one of London's most elite neighborhoods. The hotel had two entrances, one for nobles and high-profile guests, and another for specially invited guests. At the main gate, a staff member checked the special guest list, and sure enough, Victor's name was on it, personally added by Vincent Hawke. Stepping through those gates felt like walking into another world. Victor wandered through, still caught up in the glamour of it all, until he got close to the main entrance used by the real VIPs. He paused and watched as some of the city's most well-known figures arrived with their families. Wealthy landowners, famous merchants and bankers, coffee and oil traders, renowned doctors, hospital directors, artists, musicians, and theater stars. They were all there. Suddenly, a buzz of excitement swept through the crowd. The Ashford brothers had arrived. They were the biggest property and retail moguls in Belgravia and Mayfair. Right after them came the mayor of London, walking in with his whole family. Victor, now feeling a little bolder and a lot more confident, began to mix in with the big names, starting conversations, shaking hands, and slowly blending into a world he'd only dreamed of before. Just then, Vincent arrived with his family. Victor, who had been feeling a bit out of place until that moment, suddenly lit up. It was like seeing a familiar face after years. He happily made his way over to greet Vincent. Vincent welcomed him warmly and introduced him to his family, including his wife and his wife's sister, Clara. Then he led Victor over to his circle of friends, introducing him one by one to some very influential people. Victor, now surrounded by important figures, couldn't get enough of the conversation. Every story, every new connection felt like another door opening. Later in the evening, after stepping away from the crowd, Victor ran into Clara again, purely by chance. They struck up a conversation and something just clicked. A spark began to grow between them. Clara was the daughter of Richard Darnier, one of London's most renowned jewelers. Vincent seemed genuinely pleased by their connection. In his eyes, Victor was a worthy and talented young man, someone who had earned his respect. That night, Victor walked Clara home. It was the beginning of something tender and exciting, a kind of love that made the night unforgettable. As Victor made his way back to his own home, he held the pocket watch in his hand, staring at the hands that once stood still, the very thing that had changed his entire life. A deep feeling of happiness and contentment washed over him. But then he felt it again, that shadow. This time, it lingered longer. Victor didn't just sense it. He knew it was there. But just as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished. Gone again. The next day, Victor had a meeting with one of the managers from a company that imported cotton from India. He was planning to invest in their next shipment, but he was still feeling uneasy, and everything that had happened the night before had only made it worse. That afternoon, he went to see Clara again, and spending time with her brought him a bit of peace. On his way back, though, he kept looking over his shoulder, trying to make sure no one was following him. Every shadow behind him made him nervous. A few days later, he went to the company he had invested in and received his first monthly profit. He had never earned that kind of money before. That night, coming back from seeing Clara, he noticed something terrifying. A shadow standing behind him, completely still. He rushed home, but the shadow stayed there outside his house, not moving for hours. Slowly, fear started to creep in. The next morning, no matter where he went, the shadow was still there. Then he realized something's even scarier. There wasn't just one anymore. The number of shadows following him had grown. He ran home in a panic, and this time there were several shadows just standing silently in the street outside. He didn't sleep a wink that night. The next morning, scared and anxious, he rushed to the watch shop, but it was still closed. He decided he had to find the original owner of the pocket watch. Nervously, he opened the back cover and found a name engraved inside. Albert Winchester, Clerkenwell. He went to his workplace and spent hours flipping through the local property records for Clerkenwell. Finally, he found Albert's address. He set off immediately. It was already getting dark by the time he reached the house, but it looked abandoned. He asked the neighbors and found out Albert had died a few years ago in an accident. They spoke of him with a mix of surprise and pity, said he used to be a normal man, but in his final years he got paranoid, always thinking someone was following him. Victor felt the mystery getting deeper and stranger and decided to enter the house. It looked ordinary until he noticed a door leading down to the basement. Downstairs was a whole workshop filled with shelves, tools, and strange old clocks. On the wall hung Albert's notes, full of writings about stopping time. He had written that shadowy figures always followed him, and every time he stopped time, they came closer. A few lines at the end of one of Albert's notes read, "If you remain in the light, you will become light, but if you walk into the darkness, you will become a shadow. The only way to escape the shadows is through breaking and loss, losing the things that created the darkness." When Victor came out of Albert's house, he saw a few shadowy figures standing still on the other side of the street. He started walking, but the shadows started following him. Scared out of his mind, Victor broke into a run, and the shadows took off after him. He quickly pulled out the watch and turned its crown. Everything around him suddenly slowed down, frozen in place. But it didn't work on the shadows. They kept moving, their speed shifting, sometimes slow, sometimes way too fast. That weird speed change made one of the shadows catch up to him fast. Just as it reached out to grab the watch, its movement slowed again, giving Victor just enough time to slip away. He kept twisting the crown, trying to bring time back to normal, but nothing worked. The watch had stopped responding. Everything was out of control. He ran up the stairs of an old building, the shadows chasing him right behind. One of them sped up again and caught up. As Victor tried to escape, he lost his balance and fell off the building. The watch slipped from his hand, hit the ground hard, and shattered into pieces. Victor himself hit the ground right after. As soon as Victor picked up the broken watch, a wave of energy suddenly burst out and a strange storm kicked up. The storm swallowed the shadows, and they started to vanish mid-air like they'd never existed in the first place. Victor, barely able to move, dragged himself home with his body aching all over. As soon as he reached his bed, he collapsed and passed out. The next morning, when he woke up, he couldn't move his right arm properly. It felt broken. Still dazed and messed up, he wrapped it up the best he could and headed to work. But when he got to the front of the office building, the security guard stopped him and asked, "Do you have an appointment, sir?" Victor introduced himself and said he was just heading to his office. But the guard told him no one by that name worked there and refused to let him in. Victor was stunned, but with how beat up he was, he didn't have the energy to argue. So he went to the pharmacy to get some painkillers. The pharmacist looked at him, dirty, tired, and out of it, and asked if he had any money. Victor dug through his pockets and couldn't find a single coin. Confused and exhausted, he went back home and reached for the sack of coins he'd hidden. But it was full of useless scraps of paper. The coins were gone. He rushed to the bank to pull some money from his account, but the only money in there was the tiny bit of savings he had before he ever got the coins. No trace of any of his investments. Nothing. He'd even lost Clara. When he tried to talk to her, she didn't recognize him at all. That's when Victor realized everything he'd gained through the watch was now gone. He was lost in thought when suddenly a guy called out to him. Hey, I'm talking to you." Victor turned around and saw a young man calling him. The guy introduced himself and said, "I think you're the one who saved my life. When I jumped off that building, I owe you everything, 'cause after that, a new path opened up in my life. Here's my office address. I'd really like to stay in touch with someone like you." Victor, still shocked, suddenly remembered the guy, and that's when he realized not everything he did with the watch had disappeared. He decided to return the broken watch to the old watchmaker. The next day, still confused from everything that had happened, Victor went to the watch shop. To his surprise, it was open. He walked in and said to the old watchmaker, "This watch, the one you gave me, what was it?" The old man smiled and said, "A watch?" Victor showed him the watch. The old man said, "This watch was in a box, right? I've been looking for it for days." Victor said, "Do you know what kind of power this watch had?" The old man replied, "What power?" "Victor, the power to control time." The old man smirked and said, "Son, I think you're a bit tired. You brought your grandpa's watch in for repair, and when I handed you the box, you suddenly left. And now you're back with this broken watch talking about some supernatural power?" Just then, a new customer walked in and said, "I'm here to get a watch repaired." The old man smiled at Victor and said, "Well, we all have our stories, and we've got to let them out somehow, or they'll mess with our heads." Victor, still not totally convinced, didn't say anything else. He took his watch and left the shop. On his way out, he looked at his watch and thought, "Did I even tell him this was my grandfather's watch?" So how did he know? But the old man was right. Everyone's got a story. Now the question is, what's the deal with that old watchmaker, his little black cat, and that mysterious box with all his new customers? Or those names engraved on the watches? What's their story? Oh, and by the way, when time falls asleep, who stays awake?